Thank you, Acting President, and I'm pleased to rise to speak to Ms Maxwell's motion. And I think, like all of us, we do absolutely acknowledge the selfless dedication and commitment of our state's emergency workers, and I think we will all be unanimous in that, and unanimous in reaffirming that emergency workers have the right to be protected, just as the community expects us to protect us, expects them to protect us. And I'm no doubt that many of us have been at the receiving end of that protection, have been at the receiving end of that assistance, and many of the constituents that we represent, they're probably here today because of the remarkable work of our emergency service workers in Victoria. And I think, I would certainly, support, we reinforce that very clear message. It is not okay. It is not okay to be violent against our emergency workers, not in any way, ever. However, mandatory sentencing does not make us safer. It does not help make our emergency workers safer. And this is something that people seem to fail to recognise. And all of the evidence will show us that mandatory sentencing does not do this. In fact, there is no nexus between mandatory sentencing and protecting our emergency workers. None. There is no connection. Now, I believe absolutely and categorically that we must do everything to protect our AMBOs, our fireys and our police. But mandatory sentencing will not do that. And yet we talk about it over and over again. And it's one of those things, we talk about doing the same thing, and every time we expect a different result, yet it won't be a different result. Our emergency workers put themselves in harm's way to save our lives, to save our constituents' lives, and it's an extraordinarily noble and challenging job. But the evidence shows that it does not, mandatory sentencing will not make them safer. And Mr O'Donoghue mentioned the notion of a deterrent effect. Mandatory sentencing has been proved to have no deterrent effect. What we do know is that if you imprison someone, the chances of them reoffending is far higher. So we know that by imprisoning someone, we will actually make the problem worse, not better. And that has been measured. We know that once you put someone in prison, you increase the chances that they will come out and commit an offence exorbitantly by, probably around 50%. The other danger of mandatory sentencing is it fetters that judicial discretion. And I believe in judicial independence. Ms Maxwell, in her comments, talked about the judiciary being at odds with the Premier. I don't have a problem with the judiciary being at odds with the Parliament. They should remain independent of the Parliament. If they don't like what we do, well, so be it. But it is not for us to be telling the judiciary how to do their job. It fetters that judiciary discretion. And we know that it leads to demonstrable injustices. And I think, I don't think anyone in this chamber will not have read the failure of something like 3 strikes and you're out legislation in the US. That does not work. That does not reduce crime. What we do see with mandatory sentencing is it most often affects the young, the intellectually disabled, or the mentally ill, or people who are also adversely affected. Our courts, when they are looking at a case, they must, and looking at an offender, they have to balance punishment, deterrence, denunciation, rehabilitation, community protection. You know, when you read a media statement about a case, you don't get the full story. You don't hear the backstory. You don't hear whether that person lashed out because they were escaping violence and in that they ended up hurting somebody else in that circumstance. You don't hear that the reasons why that person was in that place at that time. I am not apologising and I am not protecting those that harm our first responders, but I am protecting the right of the judiciary to make those sentencing, to do that sentencing, to look at the case and balance the punishment, the deterrence and the community protection. You know, and we have talked about the Haberfield case, and that was something that did get a lot of media. And this is how our judiciary works. If we do not think that the judgment was correct, if we think that there was an error made, then we go through an appeal process. That is the safety net that is in place. Then the prosecution has every right to appeal to that higher jurisdiction. So I think it's really important to note that the community is best protected when a person is rehabilitated and the factors that underpin their offending behaviour are addressed. You know, in places like the Netherlands, they now imprison half the people per head of population that we do in Victoria. Yet their country has less crime now. Not because they're soft on crime, because their reoffending rates are lower as a result of comprehensive rehabilitation programs. We know that if you jail someone, the likelihood of them reoffending increases. So if we want less repeat offending, that means that we probably want less mandatory sentencing or less jail time. Less repeat offending means less offending overall and a much safer society, safer for our emergency workers and safer for all. Look, I support the great intent of this motion and we had this debate in the last term about this, but I can't vote in favour of a proposal that involves mandatory sentencing because it doesn't achieve the end it sets out to. So let's find an evidence-based solution that will actually make our emergency service workers safer. Let's not embrace an idea that is anything but a solution that has been proven to make problems worse. Thank you.